Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Inshallah, in today's class we will be taking, inshallah, hopefully, Hadiths 57 to Hadith 80. We will be talking about continuing our discussion on the times of prayer, and then therefore when the Prophet ﷺ would pray different prayers and showing that the best of times is the beginning of times. And then we are going to talk about the minimum amount of a prayer that needs to be prayed in its time for it to be considered valid, ada, not qada. Then we're going to talk about prohibited times to pray, and then we're going to talk about the adhan. So we'll talk about the adhan and the aqama, what the mu'adhin says, and then what the muqim says, and then what the people that hear him say. And taking the hadith about that. And then we will talk about, there's quite a few hadiths about the adhan. And then we're going to talk about the conditions of prayer, having to have wudu, having to cover the nakedness, having to face the qibla. Then we are going to talk about prohibited places to pray, like the graves, on top of the graves. Not speaking while one is prayer, that invalidates the prayer. I'm speaking on purpose. The permissibility of carrying children. And then we're going to talk about the sutra. The sutra is the thing an item that one places in front of them that you pray towards, so that therefore people can walk in front of you while you're praying, and then that necessitates the discussion on the prohibition of walking in front of somebody who prays. There's quite a few hadiths of that, and then hopefully we'll end with a hadith about khushu'ah and a piece of advice to help us with our khushu'ah. So those are the main topics we're going to talk about. Some of the sections will be a little repetitive, so hopefully I can go a little bit fast. In other words, there are several hadith that kind of are saying the same thing more or less. So once we discuss one, you kind of will understand the fiqh of the other ones. So hopefully I can pick up the pace a little bit in today's lecture to make up for, I think in the last lecture I was a little bit slow. Anyway, I'll see you back here for the first lecture, inshallah. Alright, so let us begin the way we normally begin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Qala al-Musannif rahimahullah ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. حديث number 57. عن جابر رضي الله عنه قال كان النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم يصلي الظهر بالهاجرة ويصلي العصر والشمس نقية ويصلي المغرب إذا وجبت ويصلي العشاء أحيانا وأحيانا إذا رآهم اجتمعوا عجل وإذا رآهم أبطأوا أخر والصبح كان النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم يصليها بغلس رواه الشيخان. So this is a hadith that's narrated in the Bukhari and Muslim on the authority of Jabir radiallahu anhu. And usually the prayer times, as you find in the hadith, they usually begins with dhuhr prayer, because it's dhuhr is the first prayer of the day, and then there's a straight line till Fajr, but there's a gap between Fajr and Dhuhr because there's no Fard prayer. So usually that's how it's discussed. Even when we talk about Mawaqit al-Salah, in Fiqh it's like that, and this comes from the Hadith. Anyway, so the Prophet ﷺ used to pray the Dhuhr bil-Hajira. Al-Hajira means the middle of the day when it's most hot, because it's when people people go away escaping the heat. So in other words, he used to pray the prayer ﷺ in the beginning of its time. And then he used to pray the Asr when and Naqiyya is a way of indicating that it's the beginning of the Asr time. And then he would pray the Maghrib the minute Maghrib time came, إِذَا وَجَبَتْ, when it became the minute the sun set. And then sometimes he would pray the Isha early, and then sometimes he would pray the Isha late, depending if the companions were gathered in the mosque to pray or not. So up until now, we are seeing that Dhuhr, Asr and Maghrib, the Prophet ﷺ used to pray them in the beginning, so that's the preferred time to pray the prayer. Unless there are mitigating circumstances, of course, especially like in the summer in desert countries where it's super hot, then it would be preferred to delay the Dhuhr prayer. And then in the Isha prayer, there's more laxity because it's the last prayer of the day. And then he says for the Subh or Fajr, same synonyms, the Prophet ﷺ yusalliha bi ghalas, and ghalas is towards the end of Fajr prayer actually, is when there is a mixing of sun when there's a mixing of light and darkness. So if you pray Fajr at the very beginning of Fajr, it's dark. You really only know in the modern world from the timetable. It's very hard to observe because of the artificial lights around us. It's very hard for us to observe the actual beginning of the time. So this would be towards the end of the prayer. Okay, Hadith 58. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال. Just one second, actually, I wanted to make sure of something. Yeah, so this last part about the Fajr prayer shows the permissibility of praying it on the later side. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إذا اشتد فأبردوا بالصلاة فإن شدة الحر من فيح جهنم والحديث رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Abu Hurairah رضي الله عنه, if it's super hot, if it's super hot, then cool with the prayer, meaning delay the Dhuhr prayer. So that's one of the exceptions I mentioned before with Dhuhr prayer, specifically in the summer months, anywhere where you are in the summer months. But if it's super hot at the beginning of Dhuhr prayer, don't make people come out and pray at the masjid when it's super hot and they can't be attentive, especially if the mosque doesn't have fans or air condition. I remember when we used to pray at the Azhar Mosque in the summer, they had fans, but they didn't seem to do anything. It was just super, super hot. So sometimes it's just too much. It's better to delay it, maybe closer to Asr prayer. Okay, Hadith 59. Also on Abu Hurairah. وعنه رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم من أدرك من الصبح ركعة قبل أن تطلع الشمس فقد أدرك الصبح ومن أدرك ركعة من العصر قبل أن تغرب الشمس فقد أدرك العصر رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate this hadith on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if you catch one rak'ah in the time of Dhuhr, then before the sun has come up, then you've made Dhuhr prayer. And if you pray one rak'ah of Asr prayer before Maghrib has come in, you have made Asr prayer Ada, not Qada. So basically what this means, and this is an usuli principle, is that the question is what's the minimal amount of a prayer that needs to be prayed in its time for the prayer to be considered Ada, not Qada. So based on this hadith, the answer is here, this Sahih hadith, one rak'ah. So when you get up from the second sajda and you stand erect, and then you hear the adhan of the next prayer, the time of the first rak'ah is dragged from the first rak'ah to the end of the rak'ah. So as long as one complete unit of prayer has come in the time, then the rest of the prayer is ada, even if the next prayer time comes in. And then this will give us all sorts of ahkam about what happens if you come to Jum'ah late. Do you stand up and pray 2 rak'ahs for Jum'ah, or do you have to stand up and pray 4 rak'ahs of Dhuhr? Well, if you come late and you don't pray one whole rak'ah with the jama'ah of Jum'ah, you get the reward of the jama'ah, but when you stand you have to pray 4 rak'ahs, not 2. Also, there's lessons of this in tasawwuf. So what happens when you have a wird that you have to recite in the morning or at night? Well, as long as you get part of the like, let's say the first full statement or ayah of the wird in the current time, and then the time has expired, then you take the same hukum, so on and so forth. So this is a principle you'll find all throughout. Hadith number 60. وعن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله عنه قال سمعت النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم يقول لا صلاة بعد الصبح حتى تطلع الشمس ولا صلاة بعد العصر حتى تغيب الشمس رواه الشيخان. Also Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri رضي الله عنه, the Prophet ﷺ said, after the sun rises there's no prayer, and then after Asr prayer, the Asr Fard, there is no prayer until the sun sets, meaning there's no prayer without a reason. If you have a reason, like you're entering the mosque and you're greeting the mosque, or you have a prayer that you haven't prayed and you're needing to make it up, there's a reason. This is a regular prayer. I'm praying just for the sake of praying. Hadith 61. عن أبي محمد جبير بن مطعم رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يا بني عبد مناف لا تمنعوا أحدا طاف بهذا البيت وصلى آية ساعة شاء من ليل أو نهار رواه أبو داود والترمذي وغيرهما. So Dawood, Tirmidhi and others narrate on the authority of Abi Muhammad Jubair ibn Mut'im, who is his kunya is Abu Muhammad or Abi Uday. He became a Muslim before the Fath and Khaybar, and some say during the Fath. He has 60 hadith. He was from the ulama of Quraysh. He was a very upright person, and he died in Medina radiallahu anhu in the year 58 of the Hijrah. And he says that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Oh Abdul Manaf, the family that's in Mecca, do not prevent anyone from coming to the Haram in Mecca to make tawaf or to pray any time that they want." So this hadith, coupled with the hadith before it, shows us that if you are in Mecca, this prohibition of praying in these times doesn't exist because of the sharaf, the honor and the greatness of this place. I mean, you're not going to go all the way to Mecca and then not pray. Oh, because the sun came up. No, I'm going to pray as much as I can as long as I'm here. Hadith 62 on Anas radiallahu anhu قال أمر بلال أن يشفع الأذان وأن يوتر الإقامة رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Anas that Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu was ordered to double the adhan and to make single the iqamah. So the adhan is Allahu Akbar, to say that double. So to say it 4 times. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And then Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah twice. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, so on and so forth. Except the final La ilaha illallah. Whereas in the iqamah, we say Allahu Akbar, the couplet once, and then everything a singular time. Hadith 63, also on Anas radiallahu anhu, قال من السنة إذا قال المؤذن في الفجر حي على الفلاح قال عقبه الصلاة خير من النوم مرتين ويسمى التثويب رواه ابن خزيمة في صحيحه. So Ibn Khuzaymah narrates this hadith on the authority of Anas that it's a sunnah, not a fard, the sunnah. After Hayya ala al-falah, Hayya ala salati, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala al-falah, Hayya al-falah. In the Fajr prayer that the Mu'adhin says, As-salatu khayrun min al-nawm, As-salatu khayrun min al-nawm. And this is called at-tathweeb. So this is a sunnah, and there are going to be some fiqh rulings that are going to be related to this that we'll discuss in the next clip, inshallah. So in the last clip, we ended with Hadith 63 showing the sunnah of the tathweeb, which is saying, As-salatu khayrun min al-nawm. And this is important because this is one of the things, I don't know why, but this is one of the things that some of the Shia criticize the Sunnis for doing, arguing that it's not from the sunnah, but it's obviously clearly established as a sahih hadith. It's a sunnah now, so if the mu'adhin forgets it, it's fine. Okay, عن أبي محذورة القرشي رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم علمه الأذان فذكر فيه الترجيع وحديث رواه مسلم. So Muslim narrates on the authority of Abu Mahzura. He is from Quraysh, one of the mu'adhins of the Prophet ﷺ. He had a beautiful voice. He became Muslim after the Fath. And he died in Mecca in the year 59. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ taught him the adhan and then taught him at-tarjiyah. At-tarjiyah is that you repeat the statements of the shahada twice. So, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and then silently to yourself, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. That's a tarjiyah. And then Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, etc. And in the other hadith you'll find, like in Al-Majmu' of An-Nawawi, I remember reading the hadith that's narrated that the adhan is 19 statements. So Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, the 2 shahadas silently, so that's 4, and then the shahadas out loud, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Hayya ala salat, Hayya ala salah, Hayya falah, Hayya falah, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. 19 statements. So this also confirms the tarjiyah. So this is also a sunnah, not a fard. Hadith 65 عن أبي جحيفة رضي الله عنه قال رأيت بلالا يؤذن وإصبعاه السبابتان في سماخي أذنيه فجعلته أتتبع فاه ها هنا وها هنا ولو عنقه لما بلغهما. رواه الترمذي وصححه إلا قوله ولو عنقه ولم يستدر Abu Dawood وأصله في الصحيحين. So this is originally a hadith in the two Sahih collections and also in Dawood on the authority of Abi Juhayfa, a younger Sahabi from Kufa, from the main companions of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and fought alongside Imam Ali in all of his battles, and he died in Kufa in the year 73. And he narrates 45 hadith. I saw Bilal giving the adhan, putting his 2 index fingers in his ears like this, making the adhan. So I was following his mouth, and when he would say Hayya ala salah, he would move to the right, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala al-falah, Hayya ala al-falah. Alright, so this is a sunnah, again, not a fard, from the sunnahs of the adhan. Hadith 66, عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إن بلالا يؤذن بالليل فكلوا واشربوا حتى تسمعوا أذان ابن مكتوم. رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate this hadith on the authority of Ibn Umar. May Allah Ta'ala be pleased with him and his father. That Bilal, the Prophet ﷺ said that Bilal makes the adhan at night. So eat and drink, meaning when you're fasting, until you hear the adhan of Ibn Maktoum, who was the blind companion, the Sahabi. So there's a couple of points of fiqh here. Number one is that it's a sunnah to have an adhan at night to wake people up for tahajjud. And I remember when I was a boy, I don't know if this still happens, but when I was a boy and we would go to visit Mecca and Medina, you would hear the adhan in the middle of the night. And I remember the first time I heard it, I thought, Fajr is not for like another hour and a half or 2 hours. And then I noticed that the muadhin didn't say, as-salatu khayrun min an-nawm. So when somebody pointed that out to me, I realized, okay, this is the adhan that wakes people up for suhoor, for tahajjud, etc. So at that time, it was known that Ibn Maktoum, he was the guy, should be more respectful, he was the Sahabi radiallahu anhu that made the adhan for Fajr. So Bilal, so they knew by the voice. So each one had a job. So this also shows the permissibility of having multiple muadhins that have different tasks. Or they can make adhan at the same time in different parts. And I think the Turks still have kept this Ottoman tradition. Anyway, so you can have multiple muadhins, and you kind of know by the muadhin's voice if it's a small community, oh, this is the adhan for suhoor, or this is the adhan for Fajr. Hadith 67. عن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله عنه قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إذا سمعت المؤذن فقولوا مثل ما يقول. رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Abi Sa'id al-Khudri, the Prophet ﷺ said, when you hear the muadhin, repeat what he says. And in another extension of the narration, another recension, ثُمَّ صَلُّوا عَلَيْهِ ثُمَّ سَلُوا لِي الْوَسِيلَةَ. Then make prayers upon me, this is in Muslim, and then ask that Allah gives me the wasila. So when the muadhin says Allahu Akbar, you repeat that. The shahadatain, you repeat that. The hayya ala salah and hayya ala falah, we repeat after that la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Because Allahu Akbar and the two shahadas are a form of dhikr, so we repeat the dhikr. Hayya ala salah, hayya ala falah is an invitation, so you have to respond to the invitation. So you say we are only going to be able to respond to the invitation by Allah Ta'ala's ability and power. And then we make salawat on the Prophet ﷺ. So it's a sunnah after the adhan for the muadhin to do salawat on the Prophet ﷺ. Alhamdulillah, some mosques and Muslim majority areas still revive this sunnah. Hadith 68. عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال and then when we hear as-salatu khayrun min an-nawm in the Fajr prayer, we say sadaqta wa bararta, or because there's some weakness in that transmission. Where is the quote? Sadaqa Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as-salatu khayrun min an-nawm. So either of those are permissible. Again, a sunnah. Hadith 68. عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يقبل الله الصلاة بغير طهور. رواه Muslim. So Muslim narrates on Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma that Allah does not accept a prayer without ablution, so obviously you have to have wudu before you pray. Hadith 69 عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا قمت من الصلاة فاسبغ الوضوء ثم استقبل القبلة وهو بعد حديث رواه Muslim. So Muslim narrates a longer hadith. This is part of it on the authority of Abu Hurairah, that if you stand to pray, make a complete wudu and then face the qibla. Again, the two conditions for the prayer. Hadith number 70 عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم لا يقبل الله الصلاة حائد إلا بخمار رواه أبو داود والترمذي وحسنه وصححه ابن خزيمة والحاكم. So Ibn Khuzaymah grades this hadith as sahih. It's narrated by Hakim as well. It's found in the collection of Dawood and At-Tirmidhi. At-Tirmidhi says it's Hasan on the authority of our mother Aisha alayha salam, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, a mature girl, Allah will not accept her prayer without the head covering the khimar. So this establishes the woman has to cover her head, her hair, etc. As part of the awrah to pray. Hadith 71. عن أنس رضي الله عنه قال كان النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إذا سافر فأراد أن يطوع استقبل بناقته القبلة فكبر ثم صلى حيث وجهه ركابه رواه أبو داود بإسناد حسن. So Abu Dawood narrates this with a sound chain on the authority of Anas, that the Prophet ﷺ, when he was traveling and he would want to pray a sunnah prayer while he was on his animal, which is one of the things that's permissible, he would face the qibla, Allahu Akbar, and then keep riding, even if he diverted from the qibla. So this is one of the few times that it is permissible not to pray towards the qibla. If there was like a trivia question or something, the fear prayer being one, maybe that will come later, but we certainly talked about that in fiqh, or the sunnah prayer as established by this hadith. Hadith number 72. وعن أبي مرثد الغنوي رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تصلوا إلى القبور ولا تجلسوا عليها رواه مسلم. So Muslim narrates on the authority of Abi Marthad al-Ghanawi, and he participated in the Battle of Badr. He was known by his kunya. The Prophet ﷺ made him a brother between him and Ubadah ibn Samit, and he died in the year 12. He says that the Prophet ﷺ said, do not pray towards the graves and do not sit on top of them. So let me discuss this in the next clip, inshallah. So we ended by this hadith 72 about not praying towards the graves or praying on top of them. Praying on top of them, or often do not sit on top. وَلَا تَجْلِسُوا عَلَيْهَا. Do not sit on top of them. So the idea is it's disliked to pray the salah in the graveyard. That's what it means not to pray towards the grave. Because if you pray, if let's say this is the qibla, at some place in front of me there's going to be a graveyard. Maybe it's 100 miles away, 50 miles away, 100 feet away. So that's not what he means. He means do not go to the graves and pray. It's disliked. Now sometimes, like in America, where I live half the year at least, sometimes we have to do the janazah prayer at the graveyard because it's not enough time or space at the masjid, or the graveyard is far away, so we have to hurry and get there after we wash the body, because by law we can't bury at night, things like that. So in those cases, in many Muslim cemeteries in the West, there will be a pavilion or an area to pray the janazah prayer. So that's, it's disliked, but in that case it's a necessity, so the karahiyah is removed, inshallah, because of the necessity. But here in general, you're not going to go to the graveyard and make your salah. That's the idea. You go to the graveyard to visit for the lessons and to make dua for the deceased. Hadith number 73. عن أبي عمرو زيد بن أرقم الأنصاري الخزرجي رضي الله عنه قال كنا على عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم بمكة يكلم أحدنا صاحبه بحاجته حتى نزلت وقوموا لله قانتين وأمرنا بالسكوت ونهينا عن الكلام رواه الشيخان واللفظ لمسلم. So this is the phraseology of Muslim. It's narrated by both Bukhari and Muslim on the authority of Abi Amr Zayd ibn Arqam al-Ansari, who is the famous hadith who fought with the Prophet ﷺ, all of the battles from the Khandaq moving forward. He narrated 70 hadith, And of his great stature, Allah revealed this verse in Surah Al-Munafiqeen, verse 7, لا تنفقوا على من عند رسول الله حتى ينفضوا. He resided towards the end of his life in Kufa, and he died there in the year 66, radiallahu anhu. He says, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca, we used to talk to one another while we were praying, until the verse was revealed, 238 in Baqarah, وَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ قَانِتِينَ. Then we were commanded by this verse to withhold our speech while speaking. So we know that in our fiqh we cannot speak on purpose or by accident in excess of 6 words while we are praying. So speaking on purpose is one of the things that invalidates the prayer. So this shows us that this is something that is like a situation of abrogation in which something was permissible and then it became not permissible. 73. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم التسبيح للرجال والتصفيق للنساء في الصلاة رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate this hadith on Abu Hurairah رضي الله عنه, that saying Subhanallah, tasbih, Subhanallah for the men and clapping for the women who are praying behind an imam who makes a mistake. So the imam makes a mistake, the man says Subhanallah, 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 that's permissible. Or the woman claps like this, where she takes her right hand and she claps on her left hand. Not like this. If she did this on purpose, it would invalidate her prayer, but like this. And we took that in the section of fiqh. 75. وعن أبي قتادة رضي الله عنه قال كان النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم يصلي وهو حامل أمامة بنت زينب بنت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم فإذا سجد وضعها وإذا قام حملها. رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Ibn Qatada that the Prophet ﷺ used to carry his granddaughter Umama alayhi salam, the daughter of Zainab, the daughter of his daughter Zainab alayhi salam, in prayer. And when he would make sujood, he would place her on the ground, and then when he would get up from sujood, he would carry her again. So this shows the permissibility of carrying your children. It shows the permissibility of minor movements in prayer, and it shows the great rahmah that the Prophet ﷺ had towards children. 76. وعن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت سئل النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم عن سترة المصلي فقال مثل مؤخرة الرحل والحديث رواه مسلم. So Muslim narrates on the authority of our mother Aisha alayhi salam, the Prophet ﷺ was asked about the sutra in the salah. The sutra, as I said, is the distance, like where is your prayer space end? It's not like me and then like 5 miles in front of me. There has to be, so the sutra is something that we place in front of us, a chair, a stick, a bag, whatever, in front of us. This is my prayer space. You can't violate this prayer space. So the Prophet ﷺ said the end of where you make sujood. When you make sujood, that's the distance that you need. So now the other hadith will come to talk about why that's important. So hadith number 77. عن أبي جهيم الحارث رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم لو يعلم المار بين يدي المصلي ماذا عليه من الإثم لكان أن يقف 40 خريفا خيرا له من أن يمر بين يديه رواه الشيخان إلا من الإثم فالبخاري وإلا خريفا فالبزار في رواية. So many people narrate this hadith, Bukhari and others in different phraseology, on the authority of Abi Juhaym al-Harith, who was from the Ansar, and he is the cousin of Ubay ibn Ka'b. He lived through the Khilafah of Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. So he said, if the person that cuts in front of your prayer space knew the sin that is involved in that, it would be better for them to stand and wait for you to pray, even if it was 40 years. So, don't cut somebody off on their prayer. And that's what this next series of, sequence of hadith is going to talk about. So, if somebody's praying, you don't come and cut them off, but you kind of move in front of them. If there's a sutra, then you just walk behind the sutra, or you make the space of the sutra and you walk in front of them, if you have to. Hadith 78. عن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا صلى أحدكم إلى شيء يستره من الناس فأراد أحد أن يجتاز بين يديه فليدفعه فإن أبى فليقاتله فإنما هو الشيطان رواه الشيخان. Bukhari and Muslim narrated this hadith of Abi Sa'id that when one of you prays, pray towards your sutra. So put something in front of you when you're praying, and if somebody tries to cut you in between you and the sutra, then block them. Usually put your hand out, and if they refuse, fight them. Not fight them like fist fight, but resist. Resist that, push them, make a little bit of effort so they understand, because this is a shaitan. This is a shaitan, meaning this is a bad thing to do, or this person is unaware, or the shaitan has whispered in them and they're doing something haram. So again, this is something that we seek to avoid in all costs. Of course, there are circumstances where you can cut in front of somebody, for example, if you have to fill the row in front of you or something like that. But here he's just talking about somebody's randomly praying in the mosque. You don't go and cut in front of them. Hadith 79. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إذا صلى أحدكم فليجعل تلقاء وجهه شيئا فإن لم يجد فلينصب عصا فإن لم تكن فليخط خطا ثم لا يضره من مر به يديه. رواه أبو داود وغيره وصححه ابن حبان. So Dawood narrates and Hibban grades it as sound, the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ said, when you pray, put in front of you something. If you can't find something, let it be a stick, so even the most simple of things. And if you can't, then move to the side such that there is space between you and where you would make sujood, so that no one will bother you. Okay, I made it to the last hadith. The last hadith, hadith number 80. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال نهى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن يصلي الرجل مختصرا رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate on Abu Hurairah that do not pray with your hands like this on your side. It doesn't mean sadl of like the Malikis, because for us that's also a sunnah, and most of the Malikis there's a difference of opinion inside the madhab. But don't pray like this with your hands on your sides like this. It's not a state in which you are going to have khushu'ah. والله تعالى أعلى وأعلم وصلى اللهم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Okay, so a quick recap in today's class. We took hadith 57 to 80. We talked about the times of prayer and the preferable times of prayer in general, to pray in the beginning of time, unless there's it's too hot or too cold. Even we could add that to that hadith about the heat of dhuhr, to delay the prayer in that case. We talked about the minimal amount of a prayer that needs to be prayed during its time for the prayer to be valid, which is 1 rak'ah. And we talked about some other implications that rule will give us in other aspects of fiqh and life in general. Then we talked about prohibited times to pray and exceptions to the prohibited times to pray. Then we talked about the adhan and the iqama. The adhan statements are doubled, the iqama statements are single. We talked about what you say after the adhan. We talked about adding as-salatu khayrun min an-nawm, which is known as at-tathweeb. And then we learned about the tarjiyah, which is to repeat the couplets of the shahada silently to the mu'adhin to himself before saying them out loud. We talked about what is the people that listen to the adhan and iqamah say after them, and including sending prayers on the Prophet ﷺ. We talked about Bilal putting his fingers in his ears and moving his face for hayya ala salah, hayya ala salah, hayya al falah, hayya al falah. We learned about the permissibility of having multiple mu'adhins, and also making an adhan in the middle of the night to wake people up for tahajjud and or suhoor. We also learned about the conditions of prayer. So we have to have tahara, we have to face the qibla, A woman has to cover her nakedness, which means including the head covering. We talked about the permissibility of not facing the Qibla when you're praying sunnah prayers on riding animals, as established by the Prophet ﷺ, not speaking while you're praying. Then we talked about correcting the imam when a mistake is made in the prayer. And then we talked about the permissibility of carrying children when we were praying. And then we talked about the sutra, several hadith about the sutra and the safe distance or private distance of a person who that you can't cut them off. And then lastly, we talked about khushu'ah, the first hadith of the khushu'ah, which is having the proper stance, not putting your hands on your sides, but having the proper stance, because that's going to bring what khushu'ah. Those are the major points that we talked about. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.